Hi, my name's Denver Noes with the Modern Family Dynasty. I'm excited today. We're going to have a conversation with Rick McCullough. We're going to talk about business ownership and why there's probably never been a better time to start businesses. But it is something that doesn't get enough conversation in the financial world, and people don't really realize that they can start businesses and they should be starting businesses as kind of a path to wealth. So, Rick, it's great to talk with you. Nice to have you here today.
Likewise, Denver, I've been following you and I appreciate the opportunity to chat this morning.
Well, I do too. It's going to be a good conversation. Now, you've had a very diverse background, 40 years in business, and so you have a lot of insights into founding businesses. And give us a quick, brief summary of your background and what got you so motivated to kind of get into this business realm now.
Well, it has been a very interesting career. So I began with one of the big CPA firms. I've got an accounting background and I worked with Deloitte for about 8 years. So I got to see both big and small businesses. Then I moved into corporate America and became kind of like a corporate controller. And so I dealt with operations and the cash flow engines of companies. I got recruited into investment banking. And so then I raised capital in the public markets and ended my career as a chairman CEO of two public energy companies. So during those 40 years, I got the opportunity to work with a lot of smart people, and you just pick up a number of things over the course of that kind of career. Very financially oriented, very kind of insightful about how business is run, why business is important. And then I bought a franchise about 5 years ago. And so I operated a franchise here in Denver. And then I got recruited actually to become a franchise consultant. And I think they reached out to me because of my business career and the fact that I owned a franchise. And at the time, I was getting a little bored in retirement and looking for something that was kind of mentally stimulating, but that I could work with my daughter, who's a stay-at-home mom, and do at home through Zoom calls and telephone calls and what have you. So I began that about a year ago. And what surprised me was when I found out that there was lots of people doing this across the country, but very few people that seemed to understand the kind of financial reasons why people ought to look at business ownership. It was like they understood the different types of businesses, they understood the different backgrounds that the candidates may come from, but they weren't really that familiar with the financial attributes of business ownership. And so that's actually how we met. Because so I had a long time position on LinkedIn. And so I thought, well, I'll use LinkedIn to try to connect with people that might have candidates that should be interested in business ownership. And the first thing that came to mind was the financial advisor. So I reached out to, I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 financial advisors and told them what I was doing, told them my background. And I think every conversation, essentially, they acknowledged that business ownership was a wealth building tool, but they weren't promoting it.
Right.
And more discouragingly, I don't think they were interested in promoting it. And that's about the time you and I met one another online through LinkedIn.
Yeah, I think that is unfortunately the case in my industry. And I talk about this all the time, that my industry is biased. I think over this last year, I've done, all these events on LinkedIn. We had about 2,000 different attendees, and I was going through, hundreds of personal meetings, just asking people what their thoughts were on what's missing from financial planning and financial advising. And the general feel was like, yes, financial advisors are basically just selling investments. And what people really want to know about is a lot more of these other things like building businesses. And it's really undeniable, like we've talked about before, when you look at the composition of wealth of those in the top 1%, the biggest category is business ownership. And I think that franchises, people don't know enough about that because, it's kind of like starting on third base with a lot of these businesses, right? A lot of the hard work has been done, the systems are there. And I think that's it's an opportunity there that you're bringing to the table that just a lot of people aren't aware of.
So what's happened to me is I've kind of become a bit of a trainer for franchise consultants. I've kind of expanded my presence on LinkedIn, and I like to think I'm starting to share some of those financial fundamentals, and people are realizing it. But it was like it's been a revolution, just revealing something new to them that they weren't apprised of. So I kind of wonder if the reason why franchises don't get as much attention in the marketplace as perhaps they should is perhaps we've not been representing the product effectively. We'll talk today, I think, about business ownership, which we both recognize is very important in wealth building. But when you think about a business, if you go by an existing business, you essentially pay a premium for the business because of its success. And the business is fundamentally valued on its recurring cash flows. And so when you buy that business, what you're hoping to do is grow the business so you can make it a worthwhile investment. When you start a business on your own, it's like you said, you're out in the wilderness doing everything by yourself, coming up with the product, the service, the systems, the approach, the whole thing. Whereas a franchise, I draw the parallel to what I've seen in the private equity world. When a private equity firm accepts money from wealthy people, they pool the funds and then they go buy a company. And then they put a management team, an executive team in place, and they incentivize the executives so that if the business does well, the executives do well, the fund does well, and therefore the investors do well. So the same thing can be done in franchises, and a lot of people don't realize that those businesses are totally aligned because the franchisor receives a monthly payment from the franchisee based on financial results. So the better the franchisee does, the better the franchisor does. And so in that regard, totally alignment, which is one of the most important things in looking at an investment. The other thing is, I can't think of another investment. You may have some examples of where you put your money to work and you control the investment. I used to run public companies. I was subject to SEC reporting and public reporting. My investors, I could share with them what I was doing, why I was doing it, but they had no influence over the direction of the company. In a franchise, in a business, you control it. And so you can set its course, you can moderate it, so forth. And then finally, one thing that a lot of people don't realize is tax policy of the US and our state governments are very, very supportive of business ownership. And there are a number of good reasons why you should look at it. I think you and I have talked both about retirement funds and the chronic underfunding of retirement plans. And there again, business owners can, for example, contribute 3 times as much money to a business retirement plan than they can to a personal retirement plan. So there's just a number of reasons why people ought to look at it, and hopefully I'm helping people understand those reasons to take a look at it more seriously.
Well, those you just threw out a lot of really good information, so let's kind of unpack that a little bit. And you're kind of right on when it comes to the underfunding and kind of the pension underfunding and the savings underfunding that people have in retirement. Because your normal person that doesn't own a business, once they start making more money, they're getting taxed more. And then after that, then they still have to save more and be putting money into 401ks. And then those are capped and there's limits to that. So we do see this kind of across the board, underfunding of all those areas. And then I think that one other thing you highlighted, I'd like to ask a few more questions on is when you talk about these financial fundamentals, that people are missing. Like I think what a lot of people think of a franchise, they think of the person that has an idea about a business. They think about going out and running, that business, and they think of food franchises and things like that. But kind of the way you highlighted, you don't actually see investors thinking about being able to invest in these business models in franchises in that way. And I do agree. I don't think that's been brought up much at all in the way that franchises are sold. And that's probably why it's not presented to investors, because it's a little bit different focus, right?
I think there are some in the business, like there was just a business conference for what's called multi-unit owners. A multi-unit owner is somebody that owns multiple locations of either the same franchise, or in some cases they actually buy compatible franchises and kind of try to concentrate in a particular territory. Those people fully recognize the benefits. But what is unfortunate is they don't probably rely on the consultant public as much as others do. And so they've learned through hard knocks and working with their advisors, but they have large empires. I mean, there are people in the country that own 200 and 300 locations. And it's probably just like what you see in your practice. They start out as perhaps an individual that's trying to diversify their income. They realize how beneficial it is. They take out a second unit, a third unit. A lot of times they can actually fund those units with cash flows from the first unit. So they're getting extraordinary returns on capital. They may grow into what's called family offices, where they hire people to kind of manage and oversee those businesses. So it is being done, but I think you're right. I don't think people are bringing that message to the investor community perhaps the way they should. And that's kind of my target audience, is because I think just my background and perhaps what I picked up over the years will resonate more with those kind of people.
Yeah, that's interesting. And another thing you mentioned is the parallels between private equity, where they're looking at certain fundamentals. And when you're buying an existing business, you are paying this premium for the existing business, and then they're going to go in and do a lot of the things. So does that tend to mean that even though what we often hear from franchises, they can be a little more expensive, or you're paying a franchise fee and you're paying a marketing fee, but it's probably you're paying those fees anyway if you're buying a business, buying at a premium. So I almost wonder if you're actually getting the businesses models at a more of a discount in the franchise model, and you have a lot of these systems already built. Because what private equity would do is they buy that existing business, then they go add these systems in and then make the improvements. But here with a franchise, you're kind of starting with those systems already in place.
That's very true. So the way I look at starting a franchise versus buying an existing business is you do get a significant discount because you're starting up the business, but you've got the benefit of it's a proven business model. There may be 100 existing locations around the country. They actually the franchises put together disclosure documents that are very similar to documents I developed when I was an investment banker. So I'm quite familiar with kind of the legalese that you see, but they disclose the financial results of their owners. But again, the biggest thing is you're benefiting. It's almost like a partnership that you're forming with an existing business and their sister organization, the franchisor, that's going to help you be successful. But when you think about, so I think the other thing that people look at as far as a franchise is they charge ongoing royalty fees for their assistance and for continued use of the intellectual property. In most cases, that's 6 to 8%. So some people look at it and say, well, that's an expensive fee to pay. I should start my own. But again, I think you start with a discount and you grow much faster if you're looking at a franchise. But the other thing that people don't realize, and you may, the private equity model, which operates very similar to this, an investor may incur 6% or more in fees to the private equity firm. There's
Easily,
something
yeah.
something that's pretty common called the 2/20 fee model, and then they generally have return thresholds where they earn that 20% of the return above, let's say, a 10% return or a 15% return. That can easily work out to be 6% net to your investor. So again, you can do very well with franchises, and you're getting 100% of the upside. You're not sharing it with others.
Yeah, that's a very good point on the upside. That makes me think that, there's an opportunity for someone like, because what people always think about is that someone still has to run the business. So if you have someone that wants to be the active manager, that person, maybe they're whatever stage of their career or life, and they're willing to hustle and do that work, and they can go out and raise capital, pull together a group of investors and say, hey, let's buy some territories. I'll be running it and work out partnership deals. Are you seeing people do that kind of model?
Yes. I think it's probably more likely that the investor finds somebody that they would hire, they would incentivize through profit sharing. But like if I were the investor, I would absolutely want to find somebody that I thought had the aspirations to do more. And I'd love them to become a regional manager for me, where I got economies of scale and they were overseeing multiple locations, and they did better financially. But it's really, and that's what, like I said earlier, I think generally evolves to the family office. The family office, and one of the slides that you shared on your presentations, and I use in my presentations, is the one that shows the different size portfolios. And what is so graphic is the business asset component of the portfolio, as it grows from maybe a small $10,000 balance to $1 million balance to $1 billion balance. Mm-hmm. It jumps from being next to nothing to like 70% of the portfolio of the wealthy. Well, you could stop and ask, well, why is that? And I think it's fundamentally because they hopefully can control the asset. The rates of return, which we haven't discussed yet, are appreciably higher, certainly than stocks and bonds, and even than rental income. But again, it's more challenging because you've got to turn the management over to experienced people. And there again, that's back to the parallels of private equity. That's what private equity does. They make sure the people they put in charge are incentivized and know how to run the business.
Yeah, you're really making me think on this private equity parallel, because I think there is the definitely the opportunity even to take a small team-based approach and basically build either a mini family office or a mini private equity, where even you have a team of 2 or 3 people that have business experience and that want to band together and say, hey, and then go out and raise capital and find investors and say, look, we run it, we manage it, we have experience. Then you just go out simply and raise capital and say, hey, we're going to buy these territories. Investors then get to participate, but be able to be on a passive side, but still get the tax benefits and the higher, outsized returns that comes with business ownership. That model, I think, is ripe, and I know it's out there, but it certainly is nothing that people are even thinking about. It's this mini private equity model. So I'm going to be curious to see if through the contacts and stuff we have all through LinkedIn, I bet there's a lot of people that are like, hey, I'm kind of interested in that. We should develop that more.
Well, yeah, I think. And it's because I come out of the energy field where private equity has historically been so prevalent, that I've done transactions with private equity firms. I've actually raised capital through using private equity models. And so I just have that experience and those insights. But then when I got into the franchise world, the other trend that's happening is private equity firms, now they're probably different firms than what I did business with, are buying franchises. They're buying either the franchisor or they're buying the person like you're describing that built the 8-store mini empire in a region of the country, and they're doing it because of recurring cash flows and hopefully opportunities to continue to grow the business. Um, People are buying, like I said, compatible franchises, and they're sharing customer systems. And so they're working arrangements where one home service provider shares information with the other home service provider that are both owned by the same person. And they're just having much higher success rates with, customer penetration because they're customers of the same company, or not the same company, but the same owner, and they're capitalizing on that relationship. So you see lots of examples of people that understand how it works are doing quite well in building mini empires.
Yeah, and I do think that's where the area of exponential returns does come in. Maybe we can talk a little bit about the kind of returns on franchises. Because when it comes to most traditional wealth building models, you're looking about this linear model, and you always hear the power of compound interest, and you see this chart that starts saving at 20 years old, and 50 years later, you have $1 million. And most money is not made in the stock market. Most wealth is not made in the stock market. It comes to there from other places. It's not to say there's not opportunities in stocks and stuff, there are, but most wealth tends to come from other places to there. And so when you're looking at the types of returns people can get on franchises, and what do you kind of see there? What's good ballpark ranges?
Well, first, I'd like to maybe just start with some observations about business ownership. And are you familiar with Tom Corley? He's a tax accountant. He's an author, and he did a very famous 5-year study of millionaires. And after he spent time interviewing them, he kind of categorized them, but I think it was in 4 or 5 different classes. And what he found was that the entrepreneur class made their $1 million on average 20 years faster than the employee saver. So that's kind of a starting point, is entrepreneurs can make their wealth faster. Then you take somebody like a lady by the name of Lynn Alden, who is an investment advisor. She has a website. She does a lot of consulting with, or articles with financial magazines and what. She was asked recently, how can you make 15% returns year over year? And she said, that's easy. There's only 2 ways. Either you become a Warren Buffett, which is highly unlikely, or you start a small business. And her experience, she says, she thinks small business returns are probably in the 15 to 30% type range, potentially. I've seen franchise models that appear to be that good or better. And so what I look for in franchises are, every business to some extent, except for maybe online businesses, have kind of a cap to what they can make because of a physical location or the type of product that they're selling. And so I look at how much does it cost to get into the business versus how much does the top line revenue grow to. And I look for companies that have like a 3-to-1 type metric. And what that tells me is that you're likely to get your capital back sooner. I've seen some businesses where it may take 10 years to get your capital back. Then I look for EBITDA, kind of pre-tax cash flows in the range of 20% of the top line. I've seen some businesses that are lower than that, and some businesses that are actually that or higher. But if you just do the math, if an investment top line is 3 times its initial cost and it earns 20% rate of return, that's a 60% annual return on capital. And so that's without use of leverage, which of course is possible in the franchise space as well. So you really have to be not only realize the upside, but you have to be very focused in what to look for, what types of businesses to look for. Again, I think the more straightforward businesses are better. The ones that where the labor force is more dependable and you can count on. They've got the systems and the metrics in place that you can measure them. They're out there, but again, this is going to sound self-serving. I think you need to work with people that understand the marketplace and how the private equity model works and what to look for.
Well, that's good to know because I think you're referring to kind of people like yourself that are a franchise consultant. I think you have a different background than your normal, and I think you kind of alluded to this in the beginning. Probably the vast majority of franchise consultants out there might know the franchise business, but they're kind of, and there's nothing wrong with selling just the franchise concept, but they don't necessarily have this financial background that really understands all the numbers and how these things actually fit. And so describe a little bit about what a franchise consultant kind of is. And before I do that, I want to get back to something that you just talked about on on that revenue side. So very often what we're seeing, and when you start looking at those cash flows, that means people are kind of breaking even into the business a lot quicker than I think people may realize. And that's where you're talking about, where some models, it may take 10 years to get your capital back, but some of these franchise models, it can be 2 or 3 years to getting your capital back. Right?
Oh, easily, yeah. And some of the other things I look for is, do they have things like call centers? Because call centers, are just like corporate ways in which they're drumming up leads and sending you leads that may convert into customers. Do they have national contracts where, you go into a marketplace and all of a sudden you've got access to companies that you can hopefully pick up because of the relationships that the franchisor has? Do they have recurring revenue models? I see businesses where they provide a service or a product, but they also offer like monthly contracts where the people can come on a recurring basis, get a discount. I've seen businesses that have 30 and 40% of their business is recurring, and I can't overstate how beneficial that is to the economics of the business.
Yeah, I would say I love those recurring revenue models. And that was kind of what worried me. I had some clients that were looking at franchise models recently, and one of them came up, it was a painting business. And that one kind of worried me because the ability to find a painting crew that goes out and paint houses, that labor seems like that's a tougher model. And you're going to have more issues finding good quality, paint crews. And, they go to other companies and they're going to the next business down the street. Are there certain industries you like right now that are certainly more focused or that have both reoccurring revenue, maybe not as so sensitive to labor?
Well, one of the ones that I've become more familiar with, and I actually, these are friends of mine. I developed a personal and a business relationship with them, but they're in the hydration IV space.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's quasi-medical, but what's attractive about it is their top line gross profits are like 85%, whereas my franchise was more, it was a retail food space. It was more like 65%. So if you think about occupancy cost, maybe around 10 to 15%, depending on what type of business and where you've got to locate it. Labor may cost you 25, 30%. If you don't have top line gross profit at high enough a level, you're just not going to make much money. The other thing about their model is they actually are staffed by, in most cases, nurses. And I don't think you can find a more dedicated, dependable group in the country demographically as maybe the nurse population. And so not only can they manage their compensation costs, but it's very reliable. And these people stay with the businesses for many years. and they kind of represent the business and that kind of that servant mentality. And so that's just one that I like. And the reason why I like it is because there's kind of pros and cons to what I would call the emerging brand. An emerging brand maybe has been franchising for 3 or 4 years, maybe has 20, 30 locations. So perhaps they haven't determined all the optimum ways to do business. But if you're an investor and you want to capture a territory, they've got wide open territories. And so you go to them and you say, I'd like to do this, and I'd like to do this in Houston. And they'll look at Houston and say, Houston will support X number of locations. And you can capture a big opportunity because they're emerging.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I can see too with nurses, if you're a nurse, that's a great gig because it's so much easier than working in a hospital and how hard that is. And
Well, a lot of them are emergency room nurses, and just imagine how stressful that can be. And so they kind of see this as just what you're talking about, kind of a respite from that stressful work environment they have through the hospitals.
so there's a lot of different numbers that you look at, and I've had many conversations with people in the franchise industry, and you certainly seem to have a lot more knowledge and bringing up a lot more things to think about that I haven't heard before in that area. And that's again what you do as a franchise consultant. I don't think most people can really understand what a franchise consultant actually does.
I'm glad you asked that question. So I wasn't even familiar with franchise consulting until I got contacted by um, this national organization. But what I like about it, and so let me just start about some people call themselves franchise brokers. I chose to call myself a franchise consultant. And to me, broker, the connotation is selling. To me, consulting, the connotation is advising. And so what I say and what I really mean is if I work with somebody and the right answer is a quick no, that's what I want to get to. And the reason is because I don't charge for my time. The candidate that comes to visit with me and work with me doesn't pay me anything unless they choose to buy a franchise. And so it's kind of like the real estate model. Like if you were looking to buy a home and you hired a real estate agent, that agent introduces you to property opportunities, helps you look at market conditions, property parallel comps, that you can look to see to come up with a valuation. Then they put you in touch with the seller and you negotiate your deal if you decide to do it with the seller. And then the seller pays the buyer agent the fees. It works exactly the same way in the franchise space. I don't earn a dime unless I introduce the person to a franchise and they award the franchise to the person. And then I get paid by the franchisor out of their marketing fees.
Yeah, that's dynamite. So you're basically working for free for the investor or the individual who wants to start the business. And I think there's an invaluable level of expertise. Like I do think, like in my industry, it's missing that people are talking about business ownership, and probably in that franchise world, there's not enough people making the case of how actually good the numbers are.
No,
Um,
that was quite surprising to me, and that's why I know I'm being invited to present at conferences and online training for people because they're hearing things that they had never heard or been exposed to, which is satisfying for me because I feel like I was fortunate earlier in my career to just work with smart people and have some mentors that kind of helped me to grasp some of these concepts. But I'm like almost unique. I'm not unique. There's probably others like me out there, but I'm finding that not many. And so that's why I am actually trying to target my practice to the investor community, probably people that have the capital want to diversify income or want to build a retirement stream of income, and they will relate more to the concepts that I'm talking about. And then what I try to do is I because of my experience, I try to help them read the legal documents, come up with the questions they need to ask. Just a little anecdote. I was working with a real estate investor last year, and he was looking at buying a multi-unit territory from a franchisor. And I dug into the legal document that they disclosed. And I said, Sam, do you realize that they have a sister organization, another franchisor, not the one that you're getting ready to invest in? And I said, they loaned money to that other organization. And I said, I hope it's arm's length. I have no reason to believe it's not arm's length. But if I'm investing in a franchise where they're supporting me, I don't want them diverting funds to another sister business. And so that's the kind of things that perhaps I can bring to light, just again, because of my background.
Well, I think there's probably a lot of things you can bring to light in that overall process. But another thing you brought up too, which is a good point about going to investors now, I think that, when you look at, there are, millions and actually billions of dollars trapped in IRAs and old 401ks and things like that. And people aren't even aware that they can actually use their retirement accounts to start businesses. And that's my industry's fault, the financial advising industry, because we tell everyone that the only place to invest in the stock market, but you can actually use those retirement accounts to buy franchises, buy businesses. So there's an incredible opportunity, I think, also there when you start looking at baby boomers retiring and people like yourself. They're like, hey, I'm leaving my main corporate gig and whatever I had before, but that doesn't mean I'm going to go sit in my rocking chair and do nothing. You still have a lot to contribute, a lot to give. They still want to be involved. So they can use some of these IRA dollars, 401ks, partner with the next generation, partner with their kids or grandkids and start businesses. I think that is a completely untapped opportunity. And I think so many people would find it very fulfilling when they get to, hey, I'm left corporate. Now I want to start a business. I mean, it's fun. Yeah, it's challenging, but there's a lot of opportunity there.
Right. And the program you're talking about is commonly called a ROBS, ROBS, stands for rollover for business. I can't remember what the S
Startups,
stands
yep.
for. Yeah, startup, that's right. And what it actually allows you to do is take your funds in a qualified plan and redirect them into a new plan, and that plan buys the business. And so the new plan that you own 100% owns the business. One of the negative, not negative, but one of the things structurally that you have to deal with is those companies have to be formed as a C corp, and so that opens you up to double taxation. But I'm working trying to network with other financially astute people, and I just talked with a tax person. And he walked me through how you start that business up, you accelerate your depreciation, you basically move the value down of the company, you buy it back with a LLC, and so there's ways to really use the tax laws to your benefit, but you got to kind of affiliate with people that understand them and know how to help you. But I think that's another completely untapped area. And if the investor really stops and think about it, they're investing in themselves, and they're doing what private equity firms do. So they're kind of doing what the super wealthy do, where they put tens and hundreds of millions of dollars in a private equity firm. They're doing the same thing, but they're reaping all the benefits.
That's right. That's right. We could do a whole show on those types of strategies, and C Corps in particular. I think C Corp is one of the most underutilized strategies out there. There's a lot of ways to get around the double taxation, and there's so much flexibility in it, but that's a whole nother show.
Yeah.
But as we're kind of wrapping up here, tell people how they can find you. Maybe LinkedIn is probably the best way. I'll put a link in the show notes, and then add any other, closing thoughts today.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Yeah. I've got a LinkedIn presence where I would encourage people to go there. On the LinkedIn presence, it is something called an ebook, and the ebook is something that your viewers can read. It just talks again about my background and kind of what I did in business, and hopefully kind of builds on my credibility. And then there's a calendar link where if they want to book a meeting with me, they can book the meeting and we can visit. And again, I pride myself in I was actually voted as CEO of the year by institutional investors when I ran a company. And I think it's because I just try to be very straightforward. I am what you see, and so I won't mislead people. Like I said, if we get to a quick no, if it's not right for you, I'll tell you that very, very quickly, because I don't want to spend my time if it's not productive and it's not going in the direction that helps us both.
Well, incredible insights. It's been a great conversation. I'll put a link to your LinkedIn profile. Maybe we can
Thank
even
you.
link to that ebook. But Rick, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with you today, and I know we'll chat again.
Well, Denver, I'm so thankful that I got to do this with you, because I think you and I see a lot of these same things together, and you have a platform and you have people that kind of tune in to listen to these messages. And, that's really what I'm trying to do, is kind of open people's eyes about opportunities in franchises.
Businesses are one of the keys to wealth. Very
Thank you.
good. All right, thanks, Rick.